Okay, let's unpack this. If you've ever tried to manage costs in a dynamic, fast-changing industry, you know it can feel like trying to hit a moving target, right?
Absolutely. It's tough.
Especially when we're talking about what's often a company's largest expense, labor. It's a huge chunk of the budget.
Mm-hmm. Often the biggest piece.
So today, we're diving into a really fascinating LinkedIn article. It's from Dr. Paulo Fontana. He's a real veteran in media and entertainment, worked with companies like Technicolor, SDI Media, Iowa Uno, big names.
Yeah, he definitely knows the space.
And the core topic he tackles is flexible labor budgeting in media localization.
Right. And our mission here basically is to dig into why this flexible budgeting thing isn't just, a buzzword. It's actually a strategic necessity, especially if your business volumes go up and down a lot.
Which is pretty common in media localization.
Exactly. So we're going to explore how it works, the mechanics of it, and the practical steps you can actually take to put it in place. The goal is keeping that financial plan nimble, relevant to what's really happening.
So if you've ever had that feeling where your budget plans just feel rigid, like they're
Uh-huh.
totally out of sync with reality after a few months.
Mm. Or you just wish you had a clearer view.
Yeah, a clearer picture of where the money is actually going when things shift. Then honestly, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Let's get into it.
So the source kicks off with this really great visual metaphor. Imagine two trees, right? And they're both battling a strong wind.
Okay.
Now that wind, that represents the constantly changing volumes, the fluctuating sales that a media localization company or really any dynamic business faces all the time.
Got it. The unpredictable environment.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the branches on these trees, they symbolize your budgeted costs.
Hmm.
So what is that first tree, the rigid oak? Tell us about static budgets.
Well, the oak tree, that's your classic static budget. Its branches are rigid. They're those fixed projections you make at the start of the year, and they just can't bend.
Right.
So when that strong wind hits, a big change in sales, maybe a huge project lands or disappears, those rigid branches, they break. It basically shows how a static budget, fixed like that, just becomes irrelevant. Or, worse, totally unmanageable when things change from the original plan. It's like trying to navigate a fast-moving river with a map from last year. It just doesn't work.
Makes sense. So then the willow tree, it bends and sways. How does that illustrate the flexible budget idea?
Ah, the willow. That's the perfect contrast, isn't it? It embodies the flexible budget. It bends, it sways, it adapts seamlessly to those fluctuations in revenue and volume.
Okay.
The key difference is its branches, the budgeted costs, they move with the sales. Costs go up when sales increase, they come down when sales decrease. It's that inherent adaptability.
So it stays relevant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It ensures the budget stays useful, it stays accurate, and crucially, it helps the company maintain cost effectiveness no matter what the market's doing.
That adaptability sounds key.
It is, because a traditional static budget, the one fixed at just one level of activity, it just can't give you a realistic benchmark when your actual workload or your revenue deviates sometimes wildly from what you first guessed.
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
It's a really common pitfall. And it leads straight to misleading performance reviews, makes effective cost control feel like you're constantly fighting an uphill battle.
Okay, so static budgets can break under pressure, but, for a lot of people, the word flexible might sound a bit loose, like you're just making numbers up as you go along.
Right, that's a fair concern.
So what exactly is a flexible budget then? What makes it a solid financial tool and not just, guesswork?
Yeah, good question. At its core, it's actually a really smart, adaptable financial plan. Think of it less like a fixed document and more like a living document.
Okay, a living document.
Yeah, one that automatically adjusts your spending targets based on what's actually happening in the business, specifically your actual revenue. So, unlike that static budget stuck with fixed numbers no matter how many projects you win or lose,
Uh-huh.
a flexible budget stays relevant because it reflects your real-world performance as it happens.
And the source points out something really interesting here, calls it the magic. It's not just knowing costs are fixed, variable, or semi-variable.
Right.
It's recognizing how often companies apparently misclassify them, like assuming all salaries are purely fixed. But the source says even core staff can hide these step costs.
Step costs, we'll get into those.
Yeah, these hidden traps that can totally derail your budget if you're not looking for them. And that's where these formulas become so powerful, right?
Absolutely. Understanding that true cost behavior is fundamental. And the so what of all this is massive. Labor costs, I mean, for most companies, they're the single biggest expense.
Daily.
Typically, you're looking at 50%, maybe even 70% of total operating spend. And in a field like media localization, these costs are incredibly dynamic.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, they're influenced by everything. The translation project volume, the complexity of a dubbing job, the sheer number of client support interactions needed. It all impacts labor needs constantly.
So you're saying this isn't just about trying to trim costs here and there. It's more like turning a major expense into a strategic advantage.
Exactly. That's the shift.
What's the biggest change in mindset a company needs then? To really make that leap, to see labor not just as a cost, but as this strategic lever. Can you paint a picture of what that looks like when a company nails it?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest mindset shift is moving from seeing labor as just, a necessary evil and expenditure you have to bear,
Right.
to viewing it as an investment that needs to be precisely scaled and optimized.
Okay, and invest.
And a company doing this well, they look incredibly agile. They can scale their workforce up or down, precisely aligning labor spend with the actual demand they're seeing.
So no costly overstaffing in quiet times.
Exactly. But just as importantly, they don't miss opportunities when demand surges because they weren't prepared. They're optimizing resource allocation, making sure their talented people are working on the right things at the right time.
Which directly impacts profit margins, I assume.
Directly impacts gross and net profit margins. And it's all driven by data. Real-time insights leading to smarter choices about hiring, about technology investments, about strategic growth. And it always reflects the current business conditions, not last year's plan.
That sounds like a much more proactive way to run things.
It truly transforms how you operate. It's about building resilience, building a responsive organization that actually thrives when the market fluctuates, instead of one that's always just scrambling to catch up.
Okay, so with all that newfound clarity and responsiveness,
Yeah.
what's the most immediate, the most impactful benefit you see for a business that really commits to this flexible approach?
I'd say the most immediate win is a much, much more accurate way to evaluate performance.
How so?
Because the budget itself actually adjusts to your real revenue level. It gives you that realistic benchmark we talked about. You're finally comparing apples to apples, not actuals, against some fixed target that became irrelevant months ago.
Right, so you know if a variance is due to spending or just lower volume?
Precisely. Separates those two effects.
And beyond just better evaluations, what other advantages start to bubble up once you're doing this?
Well, building on that, you get significantly enhanced cost control because you can pinpoint exactly where labor costs are deviating from that flexed budget. You can intervene much faster, more effectively.
Okay.
It naturally leads to improved decision-making. Management gets real-time, accurate financial insights. Then there's more efficient resource allocation, optimizing your teams across different units or projects.
Makes sense.
You gain genuine adaptability to changing market conditions, letting you adjust spending and staffing quickly. And interestingly, it often fosters greater motivation and accountability.
Really?
Because you're giving teams clear activity-adjusted benchmarks. They know what's expected based on the actual workload, which feels fairer and more achievable.
So it really shifts the whole dynamic.
It really does. It moves you from that reactive, often painful cost-cutting cycle to proactive, data-driven workforce planning. It's a genuine game changer for managing your biggest cost.
So let's get practical. To build this kind of budget, you said the foundation is understanding how labor costs behave.
Absolutely fundamental. You have to classify them correctly. Are they fixed, variable, or semi-variable? And then, crucially, identify what drives those costs, usually revenue.
Okay, classifying them. What are some common mistakes or maybe misconceptions people have when they try to do this, especially in something like media localization?
Yeah, that's where it can get tricky because the lines sometimes blur or people make assumptions. Fixed costs, right? In theory, they stay constant regardless of revenue changes, but only within a certain range, the relevant range.
Okay, like admin, staff salaries, maybe.
Exactly. Core admin, senior leadership. The misconception is thinking all salaries are purely fixed. Then you have variable costs. These change in direct proportion to revenue.
Like freelancers.
A perfect example. Freelance translators paid per word, voice artists per minute, subtitlers per project. Their cost scales directly with the work, with the revenue generated.
Got it.
And then there's the middle ground. Semi-variable costs, sometimes called mixed costs. They have both fixed and variable parts.
Like what?
Think of a project manager. They might have a base salary that's fixed, but also get performance bonuses tied to the number or complexity of projects they handle that's variable.
Ah, okay.
Or maybe a customer service agent with a guaranteed minimum pay plus extra hours paid when inquiry volume goes up. The pitfall here is often not accurately separating those fixed and variable pieces within the role's total cost.
That makes sense. It's not always black and white.
Exactly. And just to add that important nuance again, those fixed costs, they're only fixed within that relevant range.
Right, you mentioned that.
If your revenue suddenly jumps significantly, you might need to hire another HR person or another IT manager. These are step costs.
Step costs.
Yeah, fixed costs that increase in chunks and discrete steps when your activity level, your revenue crosses certain thresholds. A well-designed, flexible budget explicitly accounts for these steps, which is a huge advantage over a simple static one.
Okay, that's a critical detail. Let's make this even more concrete then. Can you walk us through some specific examples from the source?
Yeah.
How do different roles in a media localization company typically fit into these fixed, variable, semi-variable, and step cost categories? Maybe point out where a company might usually get it wrong.
Sure. Let's look at KGS first, cost of goods sold labor. This is the labor directly involved in creating the localized product or service.
Okay.
Here you have clearly variable costs. Translators, subtitlers, voice artists paid per unit, word-minute project. Their cost directly follows project volume and revenue. You could also argue recording engineers, mix engineers, even if salaried, are highly variable because their workload is so tightly linked to project volume.
Right, their time scales with the work.
Exactly. Then you have the semi-variable KGS labor. This is where roles like localization engineers, project managers, customer service agents, quality control specialists often fit.
Well, it's semi-variable.
They usually have a base salary component which is fixed, but often there's a variable part too. Maybe bonuses based on project load, overtime driven by volume, or performance metrics tied to the amount of content they handle. The key, and where companies sometimes slip up, is figuring out what percentage of their total cost actually flexes with revenue.
Gotcha. You need to analyze that mix.
Precisely. Now, let's look at SG and selling, general and administrative labor. These are the essential overhead costs for running the business.
Okay, the support functions.
Right. Sales reps are often a classic semi-variable example. Base salary plus commission tied to sales. Then you have roles like marketing specialists, HR, IT support, finance, and accounting. These are primarily fixed,
But
but they're definitely step fixed. You don't hire half an HR person. The total team size increases in discrete steps when revenue hits certain targets or employee count crosses specific thresholds. It's not a smooth variable line, it's steps.
okay, that's the step fixed idea again.
Exactly. And finally, senior executives, CEO, CFO, their compensation is generally considered fixed. It's usually driven by strategic decisions and overall company performance, not directly tied to monthly revenue fluctuations in the same way other roles might be.
That clarifies the different behaviors nicely. So, with these classifications sorted, how do we actually quantify the fixed and variable parts? The source mentions linear regression. Sounds a bit technical. Can you break that down simply?
Yeah, it sounds more intimidating than it is. Basically, linear regression is a statistical tool that helps you find the relationship between two things. In this case, your department's labor cost and the company's total revenue.
Okay.
Imagine you take, say, the last 12 or 24 months of data. You plot your total company revenue for each month on one axis, the x-axis, and the total labor cost for a specific department, like project management, on the other axis, the y-axis. You'll get a scatter plot of points.
Right, a bunch of dots.
Exactly. Linear regression then mathematically draws the best fit straight line through those dots. And the beauty of this line is how it reveals the cost behavior.
How does the line tell you that?
Well, where that line crosses the y-axis, that's the point where revenue x is 0. That intercept point gives you an estimate of the fixed cost component for that department. The baseline cost, even if revenue hypothetically dropped to 0.
Ah, okay. The starting point.
Precisely. And then the slope of that line, how steep it is, tells you the variable rate. It shows how much that department's labor cost tends to increase for every extra dollar of company revenue.
So it quantifies the relationship.
Exactly. You can express that slope as a percentage of sales. So using the earlier example. If regression for project management shows an intercept, fixed cost of $50,000 a month, and a slope variable rate of 5.05 per dollar of revenue,
Uh-huh.
it means you've got a $50,000 fixed base for the core team. And on top of that, costs tend to go up by 5 cents for every dollar of revenue. That 5% is your variable component, covering things like bonuses or extra support triggered by volume. It gives you a data-driven formula.
So it takes the guesswork out of separating fixed and variable.
It really does. It provides a much more objective way to establish those budget formulas, often revealing how costs actually behave versus how you might have assumed they behave.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you've analyzed your costs, you've got these formulas. How do you actually build the budget itself? Especially this top-down approach driven by overall company revenue. That sounds different from traditional budgeting.
It is quite different. In this top-down approach, senior management and the sales team take the lead initially. They set the high-level strategic goals and, critically, the overall revenue targets for the company.
So the big picture first.
Exactly. These aren't just numbers plucked out of thin air. They're based on market analysis, strategic objectives like maybe growing Netflix revenue by 30% or expanding into a new market.
Okay.
Then, these high-level revenue targets are systematically translated into labor cost targets, typically expressed as a percentage of those projected sales. And these targets are then cascaded down to the different departments.
Using those formulas we just talked about.
Precisely. Using the fixed component plus the variable percentage of sales derived from the regression analysis for each department. This ensures that labor cost planning is directly tied to the company's main objectives and revenue expectations.
So it sounds very driven from the top, aligning everyone to the main goal. But does that mean department managers just get told their budget number? Or do they have input?
Oh, absolutely, they have input. That's crucial. While senior management sets the overall framework and targets, like total labor costs shouldn't exceed X% of revenue, the department managers provide essential input on the operational realities.
Like what kind of input?
Things like specific team needs, potential bottlenecks, the accuracy of the cost behavior formulas for their area, identifying those step cost thresholds realistically. It fosters shared ownership.
So it's not a diktat, it's more collaborative.
Exactly. It has to be collaborative to work well. It leads to budgets that are not only strategically aligned, but also operationally realistic and, frankly, more likely to be achieved because managers feel ownership.
Okay, so collaboration is key. Let's walk through the implementation steps. How does a company actually put this system in place?
It's a structured process. Step one is really defining those strategic objectives clearly. What are we trying to achieve? And identifying the primary activity driver, which for this flexible labor budget is almost always total company revenue or sales.
Got it. Strategy and the main driver.
And within that, establishing those relevant ranges where your cost behavior assumptions hold true and pinpointing the thresholds for any significant step costs. You need to know when you'll need to add that extra manager or specialist.
Okay, define the playing field. What's next?
Step two is where the data work happens. Categorize and model your cost behavior using linear regression. Gather that historical data, 12, ideally 24 months. Run the regression for each relevant department or cost center, using department labor costs as Y and total company revenue as X.
Define the A and
Exactly. Find A, the fixed component, and B, the variable rate. Convert B into a percentage of sales. Now you can build your budget formulas. Department labor budget, fixed A, plus variable percent of sales B, total projected revenue. This is the engine that allows top-down budgeting based on a percentage of sales, moving away from painful headcount justifications for every role.
much more scalable. Okay, step three.
Step three is leveraging one of the biggest strengths of this approach, developing multiple scenarios. Don't just budget for one revenue number. Use the sales team's forecast as your base case.
Right.
But then also model a best-case scenario, maybe 25% higher revenue, and a worst-case scenario, maybe 25% lower revenue. Your formulas automatically adjust the labor budget for each scenario.
And have a plan B and C ready.
Exactly. It gives you an incredibly robust framework. You know how labor costs should adjust regardless of whether sales boom or slump?
Okay, comprehensive planning. And the final step.
Step four is allocating the budget and setting those revenue thresholds we talked about. Senior management sets the overall labor cost targets as a percentage of total sales based on the strategic goals. This overall budget is then allocated down to departments using their specific formulas.
And how does that work for COGS versus SG&A?
For Kaji's labor, the variable part naturally flexes up and down with actual sales. The fixed part stays constant within its relevant range, but you've predefined specific revenue thresholds that trigger those step-fixed increases like budgeting for another project manager once revenue hits X million dollars.
Okay.
For SG&A labor, the fixed part also stays constant within ranges, but the total SG&A budget might flex as a percentage of sales based on strategic decisions. For example, you might budget for an additional HR specialist only when overall company revenue crosses a certain major milestone, reflecting planned growth.
It sounds very dynamic, but also quite complex to manage, especially across different locations or departments. How do companies actually do this in practice without drowning in spreadsheets?
You've hit the nail on the head. Technology is absolutely indispensable here. Trying to do this manually, especially in a larger organization, would be a nightmare.
So what kind of tech are we talking about?
Modern budgeting and forecasting software, often integrated within broader enterprise resource planning or ERP systems, these systems are designed to handle this kind of complexity.
Okay, ERPs and specialized budgeting tools. What do they actually do that makes this feasible?
Well, first, they offer real-time data integration. They can pull data seamlessly from your sales system, your project management tools, your HR payroll system. Everything talks to each other.
A single source of truth.
Exactly. Second, automation. They streamline the whole process, consolidating data, performing those budget calculations automatically using the formulas, fixed plus percent of sales, and generating variance reports without manual number crunching.
That sounds like a huge time saver.
Huge. Third, they have built-in scenario planning tools. Creating and comparing your base, best, and worst-case scenarios becomes much faster and easier. You can tweak assumptions and see the impact immediately.
Nice.
Fourth, many now incorporate predictive analytics and even AI or machine learning. They can analyze historical data and market trends to help you forecast future labor needs more accurately.
Getting quite sophisticated.
Definitely. And fifth, they provide really robust variance tracking and reporting. You can monitor actual labor costs against that flexed budget in real time, often with drill-down capabilities to investigate why variances are happening.
The article specifically mentioned Power BI. How does something like that fit in?
Yeah, Power BI is highlighted as a really powerful tool here, useful in both the budgeting phase and for ongoing analysis.
Oh, so
During budgeting, you can use it to create interactive dashboards, pull data from different sources, model your budgets, maybe let managers input assumptions via sliders and see the impact instantly across different scenarios. For ongoing analysis, you connect Power BI directly to your ERP or accounting system
for real-time data.
for real-time actuals. Then you can visualize performance against the flexed budget, display key metrics, automatically highlight significant variances, and use charts and graphs to spot trends or problem areas much more easily than scanning spreadsheets. It makes the data accessible and actionable.
So the tech really enables the whole process.
It's pretty much essential for doing this effectively at scale.
Okay, so you've built a budget, you've got the tech, now you need to track performance. You mentioned variance analysis against the flexed budget. Why is that distinction so important?
It's absolutely critical because flexible budgeting isn't just a planning exercise. It's an ongoing management tool. Continuous monitoring and rigorous variance analysis are what ensure accountability and allow for timely corrections.
Right. So when you look at a performance report based on a flexible budget, what does it actually show you? How does it give you that clearer picture?
The core of the report is comparing your actual results, the labor costs you actually spent, with the flexible budget figures. And remember, that flexible budget amount has been recalculated using your formulas, but plugging in the actual revenue level you achieved during the period.
Okay. So it's comparing actual spend to what the spend should have been given the actual sales volume.
Exactly. That's the key. It provides a far more accurate picture than comparing actuals to a static budget based on a potentially very different planned revenue level.
Yeah.
It isolates spending efficiency from sales volume effects.
So what would a typical report look like? What are the key columns?
Typically, you'd see column 1, your actual results, actual labor costs. Column 2, the flexible budget calculated using your formula. Fixed component plus, variable percent, actual revenue. Column 3, the variance between actual and flexible, favorable or unfavorable. And often, just for context and further analysis, column 4 would show the original static budget. Comparing the flexible budget, column 2, to the static budget, column 4, gives you what's called the sales volume variance. It shows how much of the difference from the original plan was purely down to achieving a different level of revenue.
I see. So you can separate volume impact from spending impact.
Precisely. That allows for a much more meaningful performance evaluation and helps you pinpoint where management attention is needed. Is the variance because sales were lower than planned, or because we overspent relative to the sales we did achieve?
That makes performance reviews much more targeted. And this whole process, checking these variances regularly.
It's iterative. It helps you spot deviations early, understand the root causes, and adjust course quickly before small issues snowball into bigger problems.
This all sounds really powerful, but let's be realistic. Implementing something like this feels like a big shift. It can't be easy.
Yeah.
What are the common hurdles or pitfalls companies run into? And maybe why might some managers resist this?
You're absolutely right. It's not without challenges. The source highlights several key ones. A big one is often data availability and accuracy. If your historical data isn't clean or reliable, your linear regression analysis will be flawed from the start.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. Then there's the inherent difficulty in accurately forecasting activity levels, especially revenue. Even with scenarios, if your core forecast is way off, the budget starting point might be shaky.
Okay. What else?
Inadequate communication and alignment is a huge one. Getting finance, HR, and operations all on the same page, understanding the methodology, and collaborating effectively is crucial, especially when moving away from a familiar headcount-based budget model.
People might not understand the formulas.
Right, which leads to another challenge. Resistance to change and sometimes a perceived loss of control. For a department manager used to meticulously budgeting individual positions, this percentage of sales approach might feel like a black box, or like they're losing granular control over their team spending.
I could see that. Less direct control over headcount numbers, maybe.
Potentially, yeah. And finally, accurately defining that relevant range for fixed costs and correctly identifying all the significant step costs requires a really deep operational understanding that takes effort and analysis.
Okay, so quite a few potential roadblocks.
Yeah.
Knowing those, how do you actually make this work? What are the practical mitigation strategies to address these concerns and get everyone on board?
Well, first and foremost, you have to invest in robust data systems. Clean, accurate, easily accessible historical and real-time data is non-negotiable.
Get the data foundation right.
Absolutely. Second, work on enhancing your forecasting capabilities. Use historical data, yes, but also incorporate market trends, sales pipeline analysis, and really leverage that scenario planning effectively.
Improve the predictions.
Third, embrace the technology. Implement good budgeting software or leverage your ERP system's capabilities to automate the calculations, the reporting, the scenario analysis. Reduce the manual burden and potential for errors.
Let the tech do the heavy lifting.
Precisely. Fourth, and this is critical, foster cross-functional collaboration and provide training. Get all the department heads involved from the start. Explain the why behind flexible budgeting. Demystify the how. Explain linear regression simply. Show the benefits. Build that shared ownership.
Get buy-in through understanding.
Exactly. Fifth, establish clear accountability. Define who is responsible for what. Regularly review actual spending against the flex budget and require clear explanations for significant variances. Make it part of the management rhythm.
Accountability drives behavior.
It does. Sixth, continuously refine your costifications and those step cost thresholds. This isn't a one-time exercise. As the business evolves, review and update your assumptions. And finally, related to getting buy-in. Start simple and iterate.
Don't try to boil the ocean.
Exactly. Don't aim for the perfect, all-encompassing flexible budget on day one. Maybe start by applying it to your most variable cost areas or pilot it in one division. Learn, refine, and then gradually expand its complexity and scope. Build confidence along the way.
That sounds like a much more manageable approach to implementation.
It definitely helps overcome that initial resistance and builds momentum. Ultimately, implementing this kind of top-down flexible budget for labor, driven by a percentage of sales, really does transform how you manage costs. It shifts it from being a reactive, often painful exercise.
Yeah, the end of quarter scramble.
Right. It shifts it to being a proactive, strategic advantage. It empowers the organization to truly optimize its largest expense and build a workforce that's resilient, responsive, and ready to adapt.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? This deep dive, drawing on Dr. Fontana's insights, really shows how digging into your cost behavior, using data smartly with tools like linear regression, and embracing strategic, flexible planning. Well, it can lead directly to more sustained profitability and a genuine competitive edge, especially if you're in one of those industries where demand just keeps fluctuating.
It provides a roadmap for navigating that uncertainty and maybe leaves you with a final thought to ponder. Looking at your own organization's budget, what area do you think could benefit most from embracing this kind of dynamic flexibility? And where might you start listening for its fixed and variable heartbeat?
A great question to consider. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it valuable and encourage you to keep exploring these powerful ideas.